When you raise a child, you never imagine the day he'll look you in the eyes and tell you you're a burden. That day came for me on a cold Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the light falls sharp through the windows, and even silence feels like it's waiting to say something cruel. My son Jacob stood at the end of the dining table, jaw tight, voice cold, and said, "Dad, I'm done supporting you. You had your life. It's my turn now." It wasn't what he said that broke me. It was how he said it. There wasn't anger or frustration, just finality, like he'd already rehearsed it 100 times. I sat there, staring at the man who used to run into my arms after every scraped knee, the boy who once believed I could fix anything. And now, apparently, I was the problem he wanted to fix. I didn't respond right away. I just watched him, and in those few seconds, decades of memories flashed. Me working overtime to pay for his college, selling my truck to fund his startup, and standing in the rain cheering at his high school graduation when I could barely afford rent. But life has a cruel way of flipping scripts. After his mother passed, I lost more than just a partner. I lost my balance. Bills piled up, the house fell into disrepair, and my health started to slip. I wasn't asking Jacob for luxury, just help with utilities until I got back on my feet. He'd agreed, at first. But after a few months, his tone changed. He'd sigh whenever I called. He'd forget to send the check just this once. And when I gently reminded him, he'd talk about boundaries, independence, and living his own life. I tried not to take it personally. After all, I'd raised him to be independent. I wanted him to have a better life than I did. But I never imagined better would mean without me. That Sunday, when he made his speech, I didn't argue. I just said, "All right, son, I understand." He seemed almost relieved, like he'd just unloaded a weight. He patted me on the shoulder, my own son, and said, "You'll be okay, Dad. You just have to start taking responsibility for yourself." The irony almost made me laugh. Responsibility. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the quiet house and looked around at the memories. The photographs, the worn-out furniture, the dent on the staircase banister where Jacob used to race his toy cars. Everything had his fingerprints on it. And then, my eyes landed on the file cabinet in the corner, the one filled with old documents, receipts, and deeds. Jacob's name was on some of them. When he was younger, I'd put certain assets under both our names, partly to secure his future, partly because I trusted him blindly. One of them was the old duplex downtown. It had been paid off years ago and was supposed to be part of his inheritance. He didn't know that. I opened the folder and stared at the papers for a long time. My hands trembled slightly, not from anger, but from realization. I had given everything to make his life easier. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every missed vacation, all to give him choices I never had. And now he stood before me, telling me I was a burden. Maybe it was time to remind him what responsibility really meant. The next morning, I called my lawyer, an old friend named Charles. I told him I wanted to make some changes, nothing dramatic, just adjustments. He laughed when I explained my plan. "John, are you sure about this? You're talking about foreclosing on your own son's future." I smiled faintly. He's the one who said he was done supporting me. I'm just setting him free. Charles knew better than to argue. He just said, "All right, let's get the papers in order." As I signed the first document, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was clarity. For years, I'd lived under the illusion that love meant endless giving, that a good parent never let their child struggle. But sometimes, love means letting the lesson hit hard enough to leave a mark. 3 weeks later, Jacob called. His voice was cheerful. "Hey, Dad, guess what? I'm getting a loan to expand the business. The bank just needs property verification for the duplex you transferred to me years ago." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. "About that, son." There was a pause. "What do you mean? The duplex isn't yours anymore. I signed it back to the trust." Silence. Then disbelief. "You did what?" "You said you wanted independence. I'm just helping you live that way." The sound that followed wasn't just shock. It was betrayal. He couldn't process it. "Dad, That's my future. You can't just. I already did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply repeated what he had told me weeks before. You'll be okay, son. You just have to start taking responsibility for yourself. And with that, I hung up. That was the day I stopped being the father who gave and started being the man who taught. For 2 days, I didn't hear a word from Jacob. The silence was loud, but I'd learned to live with it. Then, on the 3rd morning, he showed up at my doorstep. No call, no warning, just the sound of his car screeching into the driveway like a storm about to hit. When I opened the door, his face was red with anger. What the hell did you do, Dad? He didn't even say hello. I stood there calmly, leaning on the doorframe. Come in, I said. He barged past me, slamming his phone on the table. The bank called. They said you revoked my property claim. You knew that duplex was part of my collateral. Why would you do that? I looked at him quietly. Sit down, Jacob. I don't want to sit down, he shouted. You've ruined everything. That expansion was supposed to take my business to the next level. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked? I sighed and finally sat, folding my hands together. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked, Jacob? He froze. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I continued, my tone steady but heavy. You're talking about one business deal. I worked 40 years to make sure you could chase that dream. I broke my back, sold my tools, and went without food some nights, just so you could have a future. And now, when I ask for a little help, you call me a burden. He blinked rapidly, anger and guilt wrestling inside him. It's not the same thing, Dad. You don't understand how stressful it is trying to manage everything. I'm doing this for both of us. For both of us? I chuckled bitterly. You said you were done supporting me. That was... He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't mean it like that. I was frustrated. Frustration doesn't excuse cruelty, I said softly. The room fell quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. I could see his pride crumbling, but pride dies slow. He muttered, You could have just talked to me before doing something so drastic. I did, I said. That Sunday, when you gave your little speech, you told me everything I needed to hear. He shook his head. This is revenge. I looked at him squarely. No, this is reflection. I just held up a mirror. He stared at me for a long time, breathing hard, before finally whispering, You really think this will teach me something? I hope it teaches you gratitude, I said, and maybe a bit of humility. Jacob grabbed his phone and stormed out. The sound of the car fading down the street was strangely satisfying and heartbreaking at the same time. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fading orange. A part of me hoped he'd come back, maybe to apologize, maybe to talk, but he didn't. The next few weeks passed quietly. For the first time in years, I had no one to depend on, and strangely, that gave me peace. I started fixing things around the house, tending the garden his mother used to love, and even joined a local volunteer group that repaired old homes for low-income families. One afternoon, while patching a leaky roof with an old hammer and a can of nails, I thought about Jacob again. Maybe he'd finally learn what it meant to struggle, to fight for stability, instead of expecting it. Then one day, I got a letter from his company. Well, the company that used to be his. The logo was gone, replaced by a new name. Inside, the letter explained that the business had been sold. Jacob had defaulted on his loan and lost his ownership rights. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. I wasn't surprised. That night, the phone rang. It was him. His voice was quieter, broken, missing the arrogance it once carried. Dad, he said softly, can I come over? Of course, I replied. An hour later, he arrived, not in a sharp suit like before, but in a worn hoodie. His eyes looked tired. I lost the business, he admitted. They took everything. The investors pulled out, and the loan, well, you already know. I nodded slowly. I'm sorry to hear that. He sat down, rubbing his hands together. I've been thinking a lot lately. About Mom. About how you used to work 2 jobs and never complained. I guess I never realized how much you sacrificed. I stayed silent, letting him talk. I thought success meant not needing anyone, that asking for help made me weak. But now, I get it. You weren't weak, Dad. You were just trying to survive. Tears welled up in his eyes. And for the first time in years, I saw the boy I raised, the one who used to care. I'm sorry for what I said, for calling you a burden. I was selfish. I took a deep breath, then said, "You weren't selfish, son. You were lost. We all get lost chasing things that don't matter." He looked up. "Can we start over?" I smiled faintly. "We can, but not like before. You have to rebuild your life, Jacob. I'll help, but not by handing things over. This time, you'll earn it." He nodded slowly. "I understand." We sat in silence for a while, the air heavy but healing. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked, "Did you really foreclose everything in my name?" I smirked. "Almost everything, but not all." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's one property left under your name," I said. "But you won't get it now. It's locked in a delayed trust. You'll inherit it after you complete 1 full year of financial independence. No debts, no bailouts, no shortcuts." He chuckled through the tears. "That's your way of saying grow up, huh?" "Exactly." As he left that night, I felt something shift between us. The anger was gone. The resentment had melted into quiet respect. Maybe the foreclosure wasn't an act of revenge after all. It was an act of love disguised as consequence. Still, life had one more twist waiting for both of us. Because a month later, I received a legal notice. Not about the duplex, not about inheritance, but something far more personal. Jacob had filed a petition to transfer guardianship of me to the state, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my finances. For a long moment, I couldn't believe what I was reading. My own son, after all the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the lessons, was now legally trying to strip me of control over my life. I sat there on the porch, the paper trembling in my hands as the evening breeze turned cold against my face. The words blurred together. Petition for guardianship due to mental instability. Mental instability? I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hurts more than crying. I had built this house with my bare hands, paid every bill on time, managed every detail of my life, and yet here was my son, claiming I was unfit to make my own choices. The next morning, I went to see my old friend Richard, my attorney of 20 years. He looked over the document with a long sigh. "Jacob must be desperate," he said. "This isn't going to hold, but it tells me a lot about his state of mind." "Greed," I said quietly. "He's lost everything, and now he's looking for someone to blame." Richard nodded. "He probably thinks he can claim incompetence, regain access to your assets, and rebuild his fortune." I rubbed my temples. "He doesn't realize he's destroying the last bridge he has left." That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about his mother, how she would have handled this. She had always been gentler, always believed that love could fix everything. But love, I was learning, needs boundaries too. When the court date came, Jacob walked in looking defeated but defiant. He avoided my gaze as his lawyer spoke about erratic decisions and emotional instability due to age. I sat quietly, letting the performance unfold. When it was my turn, I stood up, holding a single folder. "Your Honor," I began, "if responsibility and foresight are the measures of mental fitness, then I would like to present evidence that my so-called instability has, in fact, secured both my life and my son's future." I handed over financial statements, trust documents, and medical reports, all in perfect order. Everything I've done has been legal, planned, and documented. The only instability here, I added, turning toward Jacob, is in his sense of entitlement. The courtroom was silent. Jacob's lawyer tried to object, but the judge lifted a hand. "Mr. Taylor," the judge said to me, "your records are thorough. This petition seems misplaced. I'm dismissing the case." Jacob's shoulders slumped. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. As I walked past him, I paused and said quietly, "You can keep trying to take from me, Jacob, or you can learn to stand again. The choice is yours." Outside, the sky had turned gray, the kind that feels like a warning before rain. As I stepped onto the courthouse steps, I felt lighter somehow. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally let go of the illusion that I could protect him from himself. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from Jacob. Not a call, not a message. Then, one morning, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, a woman stood there, young, well-dressed, nervous. "Mr. Taylor?" she asked. "Yes? I'm Melissa. I used to work for your son. He, asked me to give you this." She handed me a small sealed envelope. I thanked her, closed the door, and opened it slowly. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. "Dad, I messed up again. I thought I could fix everything by proving you wrong. I see now that I've only made things worse. I'm sorry. I'm leaving town for a while. Please don't try to find me. I need to figure out who I am without all this money stuff. Jacob." I sat back, staring at the letter. It was short, but it was honest. Maybe, for the first time in years, he was taking responsibility. Months passed, seasons changed, and my life settled into quiet rhythm again. I found joy in simple things: the smell of rain, the hum of the old radio, the sound of birds in the garden. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Taylor?" a woman's voice said. "This is the director from the Lakeside Shelter. I believe your son Jacob has been volunteering here for the past 3 months. He wanted me to let you know he's doing well." I felt something deep inside me shift, relief mixed with pride. "Thank you," I said softly. After the call ended, I sat on the porch again, staring out at the horizon. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to learn what truly matters. 2 months later, Jacob came home. He didn't have fancy clothes, or a car, or a sense of superiority anymore. He just had a worn backpack, a faint smile, and eyes that had finally seen the real world. "Dad," he said, standing on the porch where everything had once fallen apart, "I got a job at a local repair shop. It's not much, but it's honest work." I smiled. "That's more than enough." He hesitated, then pulled out an envelope from his pocket. "I've been saving some money. I wanted to pay you back for the times I took without asking." I looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "You can't pay back love, Jacob. You can only honor it by doing better." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. That night, we sat together for dinner, just the two of us. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was comfortable, like the quiet understanding between two people who had finally stopped fighting fate. After dinner, I walked him to his old room, the one that had sat empty for years. It still had the posters, the trophies, and the faint smell of youth. He looked around and smiled sadly. "Feels smaller than I remember. Maybe you just grew," I said. He laughed softly. "Yeah, maybe." As he unpacked his bag, I noticed something fall out, a small silver coin. I picked it up and recognized it instantly. It was the lucky coin I had given him when he graduated high school. "I can't believe you still have this," I said. He smiled faintly. "It's the only thing that's always reminded me of home." That night, I slept better than I had in years. For once, I didn't worry about tomorrow. But as life would have it, peace never stays forever. A storm was coming, one I didn't see until it was too late. Because 3 weeks later, Jacob disappeared again. The first few days after Jacob disappeared were filled with confusion. His phone went straight to voicemail. His new workplace hadn't seen him, and no one at the shelter knew where he'd gone. I told myself he probably needed space again, that maybe he'd gone on a trip or found a new job. But deep down, I felt something wasn't right. On the 5th day, I received a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was low and weak. "Dad, it's me." "Jacob?" My heart nearly stopped. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'm fine. I needed to get away for a bit. I'm at a motel near the old industrial park. Don't worry, I'm okay." But I could hear it in his tone. He wasn't okay. There was a kind of exhaustion, a defeated tremor that fathers recognize instantly. "I'm coming to get you," I said. "No, please, I'll be fine. I just need time to think." "Jacob." The line went dead. That night, I barely slept. Memories of his childhood came rushing back. His first bike, his graduation day, the first time he called me Dad after his mom passed. I'd spent years trying to build a future for him, only to watch him tear it down piece by piece. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the motel he mentioned. The clerk said he'd checked out early that morning. No forwarding address, no trace. Days turned into weeks. Then, one evening, while I was cleaning the porch, a black sedan pulled up to the house. 2 men in suits stepped out. "Mr. Taylor?" one of them asked, holding out a badge. "Detective Harris. City Police. We'd like to ask a few questions about your son." My chest tightened. "What happened?" They exchanged a glance before one of them said, "There was an incident near the old industrial park. We found a vehicle registered under Jacob Taylor. He wasn't there, but there were signs of a struggle." For a few seconds, the world went completely silent. My vision blurred, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. "Is he alive?" "We don't know yet," the detective said softly. "We're doing everything we can to locate him." After they left, I sat on the porch for hours, watching the night sky, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with him. The words "I'm done supporting you" echoed in my mind, and I wondered if maybe I had failed him in ways I couldn't see. 3 days later, I got a call from the police again. "Mr. Taylor, we found your son." My knees nearly gave out. "Is he?" "He's alive," the officer said. "But he's been admitted to a rehabilitation center just outside the city. He's been struggling with depression and substance dependency. Apparently, he checked himself in." Relief and heartbreak collided in my chest. When I visited the facility, I barely recognized him. His face was thinner, his hair unkempt, but his eyes, those same eyes from when he was a child, still carried a flicker of light. "Dad," he whispered when he saw me. I sat beside him, fighting back tears. "You scared me half to death." "I know," he said, his voice trembling. "I messed up again." He told me how the pressure of losing everything had pushed him toward alcohol, how guilt had eaten away at him until he couldn't stand it. "I didn't want to be like this. I just wanted to make you proud again." I took his hand. "Son, I was never ashamed of you. Just heartbroken. There's a difference." He cried quietly, his shoulders shaking. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just my son. He was a man haunted by his own mistakes, desperate to be forgiven. Over the next few months, Jacob stayed in treatment. I visited every week, bringing him home-cooked meals, old photos, and sometimes just silence. The kind of silence that says, "I'm here." One day, his counselor pulled me aside. "Your son's making progress," she said. "He's learning accountability, humility, and gratitude. But he talks a lot about you, how he wants to make things right." I nodded, unable to speak. When Jacob was finally discharged, he didn't come home right away. Instead, he rented a small apartment and took a job at a community center, helping other young men rebuild their lives. He called me every evening now, not out of obligation, but out of love. "Dad," he said one night, "I've been saving money again. I want to fix up the old house with you, make it ours again." Something about the way he said ours hit me deeply. Maybe, at last, he'd learned that home isn't built with money. It's built with remorse, effort, and love. Months later, on his birthday, I invited him over. I had something special planned. When he walked through the door, I handed him a small box. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was a single key, the key to the duplex I had foreclosed months ago. His eyes widened. "Dad, what did you do?" "I signed it back over to you," I said. "But this time, it's not a gift. It's an investment. You'll manage it, maintain it, and rent it out responsibly. Every dollar you make will go into a trust, not for you, but for your future family." He stared at me, speechless. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll honor it," I replied. He smiled, tears pooling in his eyes. "I promise." That night, as we sat in the living room, the laughter felt real again. No tension, no pride, no resentment, just a father and son finally rebuilding what greed had destroyed. For a long time, I thought revenge was the only way to make him understand. But in the end, love had done what anger never could. It healed us both. Still, life had a sense of humor. The very next morning, I received a letter that changed everything again. It was from the bank. They had approved a massive real estate development project, one that would be built directly on the land where our duplex stood. The compensation offer? Nearly 10 times its market value. I looked at Jacob, who stood there speechless, and smiled faintly. Looks like your inheritance just foreclosed on its own future. Jacob couldn't believe it. He held the letter with shaking hands, reading it again and again, as if his eyes were playing tricks on him. 10 times the market value, he whispered. Dad, that's life-changing money. I chuckled softly. You're right, son. But this time, it's not about the money. It's about what we do with it. He looked up at me, guilt and gratitude mixing on his face. After everything I did, why would you even think of sharing this with me? Because you finally learned what really matters, I said. And that was the lesson I wanted you to understand all along. Jacob's eyes welled up again. And this time he didn't hold back. He hugged me tightly, just like he did when he was little. I don't deserve this, Dad. No one deserves grace, I said quietly. That's what makes it powerful. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The anger I had carried, the bitterness, the resentment, it all dissolved like frost in morning sunlight. Over the next few weeks, we worked together on the final paperwork. The sale went through smoothly. The bank wired the funds, and I divided them exactly as promised. Half went into a trust in Jacob's name for future investment, and the other half I used to finally retire. But life, as always, had one more surprise waiting. A few days after the sale, Jacob showed up at my door with a small brown box. This came for you, he said. No sender's name, just our old address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo of me and him from years ago, standing outside his college dorm, smiling proudly. Attached to it was a note written in handwriting I immediately recognized. For the man who never stopped believing in me, even when I gave him every reason not to. This time, the gift is for you. Below the note was a small silver key. What's this? I asked. Jacob grinned. That's the key to your new workshop. I bought it with the first payment from the trust. I thought you might finally build that fishing boat you always talked about. For a long moment, I just stared at him. My son, the same boy who once screamed that he wished I wasn't his father, now looked at me with pride. Guess the student's teaching the teacher now? I said with a laugh. He smiled. Maybe I just learned from the best. That evening, we sat outside watching the sunset. The sky burned with deep gold and crimson hues, the kind that remind you of both endings and new beginnings. Jacob leaned back in his chair and said, You know, Dad, when I first lost everything, I thought I'd never come back from it. But I realize now, losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. It stripped me down to who I really was. And when I finally had nothing left, all that remained was the truth. I nodded slowly. Sometimes you have to lose the world to find yourself, son. He smiled faintly. And sometimes you have to lose yourself to remember who your father taught you to be. Months later, I attended the opening of his new project, a rehabilitation and counseling center for young men who had lost their way. It wasn't fancy or big, but it was filled with hope. On the front wall hung a framed plaque that read, In memory of the man who believed in second chances. My name was written underneath. When he took the stage to speak, he glanced at me in the crowd. His voice was steady, confident, nothing like the broken boy I once found at that motel. My father taught me that revenge might feel satisfying, he said. But forgiveness transforms. What I took from him once, life returned in a way I never expected. Because sometimes, grace is the real revenge. The audience applauded, but all I could do was sit there, smiling through tears. After the ceremony, Jacob came over and hugged me again. You know, he said, I still think about how everything could have gone differently. I smiled. It did go differently. That's the beauty of it. He nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, I guess my real birthday wasn't the day I was born. It was the day I finally understood you. I laughed softly. Well, if that's true, then happy birthday, son. He grinned. Thank you, Dad. And don't worry, I won't forget this one. Epilogue. A year later, I received another letter, this time from Jacob's girlfriend, Emily. She wanted me to come to a small family gathering. When I arrived, the house was filled with laughter and warmth. Jacob stood at the door, smiling wider than I'd ever seen. "Dad," he said, taking my hand, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." Emily appeared beside him, holding a baby wrapped in a soft blue blanket. "Dad," Jacob said with a tremble in his voice, "this is your grandson. We named him Henry Jacob Taylor." For a moment, time froze. All the pain, all the anger, all the regret, it felt distant, irrelevant. As I held that tiny child in my arms, Jacob said, "I want him to grow up knowing what real love looks like, the kind that doesn't give up." Tears blurred my vision. "Then you'll have to teach him," I said, smiling, "because I think you finally understand." Jacob nodded, eyes full of quiet pride. "I do, and I'll never forget the birthday that started it all." Moral of the story: forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in hurting back, but in healing forward. Because when love finally learns to forgive, even broken families can find their way home.